Hey everyone and welcome to today's video. I was reviewing this cheap $100 to $120 Thunderbolt eGPU from AliExpress a while ago with a mini PC and later with the RG Ally X. But as it turns out, I have to admit that the reviews weren't complete, as I didn't get great results in some of the games at 1080p. I didn't bother testing this guy at 1440p and 4K. Because I thought the bottleneck would be even bigger on higher resolutions because of the bandwidth limitation. Well, turns out that actually the opposite can be the case, so let's talk about that.
This is Hubwood.
Now for this video, I was using my personal Palit RTX 4070 that works in my own PC with a Ryzen 7700X day and night. So I tested a couple of games at 1080p. 1440p and 4K on ultra settings, with and without DLSS and with and without frame generation on my desktop PC. Then connected the eGPU to my Gigabyte Aorus 15 laptop, which sports an i7 12700H, and compared the results I got there. By the way, the 12700H is still a quite well-performing mobile CPU and should not be a big bottleneck in most games, specifically on higher settings. For the tests on the laptop, I was using a separate 4K monitor, which I plugged directly into the eGPU via DisplayPort and not the laptop itself, since that improves the performance quite noticeably. I also used the infamous newest official Windows patch that already fixed results for recent Ryzen CPUs by a bit for both PCs, but not the upcoming 24H2 update. For my desktop PC, I set the AMD Ryzen 7700X to the 65 watt eco mode to make the comparison a bit fairer. For Cyberpunk 2077, I was using the integrated benchmark at ultra settings without ray tracing enabled. Whenever I use DLSS, I use the balanced mode for each run. Looking at 1080p, here we can see that the RTX is throttled heavily and can only reach around 50% of its desktop performance. A maximum of 129 FPS on average, even with DLSS and frame generation activated. In comparison, on my desktop PC, it is able to reach 228 FPS with these settings. The 1% lows seem to be mostly okay, though as you can see here, activating DLSS didn't improve the FPS almost at all, meaning even using lower settings would not help and only fake generated images via FG can actually make a difference. But that causes some issues with the frame pacing, leading to worse 1% lows. Now, when I switched to 1440p, the gap between my laptop and my desktop PC now got actually smaller. Except for the test with DLSS, as once again it kinda seems to be stuck at around 67 FPS. Probably not possible to get more FPS in this game via the eGPU. But with frame generation activated, I was actually able to hit the 100 FPS barrier. And at 4K the gap was even smaller, especially with DLSS and frame generation activated. The RTX 4070 was now even providing more frames when it was connected to my laptop via the eGPU, and I have absolutely no clue why that happened and triple checked it. But I'm just going to consider that a coincidence or an error for now, and at this point let me recommend Hardware Unboxed's recent video where they talk about why Windows 11 sucks in a way, talking about bad and good installations. But overall, it was playable alright, especially for weaker laptops or mini PCs and gaming handhelds without a dedicated GPU. Wukong Black Myth seems to be a game that is quite heavy on the GPU and not so much on the CPU, as here, even at 1080p, the gap was already very small and the game is actually playable using the eGPU with my RTX 4070. In this case, I was using the integrated benchmark again, which you can download for free via Steam, and be aware that you cannot run this game without any upscaling technique. So that's why I was not able to test the native resolution. Again, the frame times haven't been as good as on my desktop PC, but I would still consider it playable with only a few micro stutters here and there. At 1440p, the results were similar in comparison with higher FPS across the board. At least with DLSS and frame generation, I was seeing above 70 FPS using the eGPU, but you have to keep in mind that it has an effect on the input latency that more sensible players might notice. And at 4K, the difference shrank once again to around 10% in the best scenarios, while as mentioned before, the 1% lows are a bit worse. So at 4K it becomes a matter of taste, if one could call it playable, I guess, even on my desktop PC with DLSS and frame generation enabled. Though one would most certainly have the option of using DLSS at performance instead of only balanced here. And because Wukong is such a tough title to run, let's also quickly have a look at the results with only high settings. The FPS lift is absolutely noticeable, while the game still looks pretty good. But I'm just quickly going to show you the tables without commenting on them in this case, so feel free to pause the video to take a closer look at the numbers. And I just quickly want to point out that now the game really becomes playable even at 4K on both configurations. So overall, I have to say, it worked pretty well, even using the eGPU at 1440p and 4K. Forza Horizon 5 did have severe issues with the RTX 4070, just as in my video with the ROG LIX a few weeks back. With the eGPU, it now again had stuttering issues and was absolutely unplayable due to really terrible frame pacing. Back then I didn't have that problem with an older GTX 1070 Ti I also tested, so it might be the card or somewhat throttling the faster GPU, making some part of that configuration too slow for more FPS, I don't really know. But that occurred with all the settings that I've tested using the Extreme preset, and lowering the settings didn't change that as well. So again, I'll just quickly show the tables, and we have to take note that in some games a Thunderbolt eGPU can be a real issue with some desktop GPUs, unfortunately. And last but not least, I also tested the new Star Wars Outlaws with mixed results. For this game I was using the regular 16:9 mode, not the cinema mode with black bars, since I figured most people would play that way. If you're not, let me know in the comments. And I was just walking around in the town a bit right after the beginning of the game, directly to the first quest goal and back to the bar. Especially at 1080p, the difference was huge, with the RTX 4070 performing more than twice as fast in my desktop system without DLSS, and even 4 times faster with DLSS enabled. Even frame generation didn't really seem to help a lot, and the game was stuck at around 59 FPS. Lots of micro-stuttering going on, and again, lowering the settings to even low did not help here. So something is holding back the RTX 4070 in this game once more. At 1440p the difference shrank a bit, but it was still unplayable with all the micro-stuttering going on here. And whereas frame generation can't fix bad frame times in some titles, this was not the case for Outlaws. The 1% lows are so bad it would destroy an enjoyable gameplay for almost anybody, even being slightly sensitive to micro-stuttering. And at 4K the difference of the average FPS is now actually really acceptable once more, with only up to 20%, but the game remained unplayable, just like before, both due to average FPS and the 1% lows. What's the conclusion? Well, even at 1440p and 4K, Thunderbolt for eGPUs often cannot perform as well as in a desktop. And we will have to see if Thunderbolt 5 is going to work significantly better soon. And in the end, it really depends on the game, as it's actually quite okay for a number of titles. And yes, it did perform a bit better on higher resolutions, as some of you mentioned, compared to 1080p. So all this testing wasn't for nothing, I guess. Now, I hope this video was helpful for anybody looking to get one of these cheap Thunderbolt 4 eGPUs themselves. And if you want to try it out, I will post a direct link to AliExpress in the description below this review. And that's all for today. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button or subscribe for more laptop stuff and reviews around mobile tech. Thanks for watching, see you next time, bye bye and cheers.